Oh, okay. You want to just like here? Here.
Start this one.
We're done with the remarks. Excellent. So we just don't like stretch out big like this. Oh. Scoot over this way like 6 inches.
All right. So yeah. Great.
Great.
So thank you guys for coming. We really appreciate it.
Project so they can hear you.
Right. So, and thank you for joining us. We really appreciate it. I'm Ken Stewart. I'm the sort of technologist, composer, and we met in Scottsdale, Arizona. John and I met in Tucson, Arizona, at very different times. Natalia's a recent acquisition of friendship, and John and I have known each other for about half our lives. We played together in youth orchestra and in university, and we played in a ska core band together back when ska was a thing. Although I like to think it still is. Yeah, exactly. It still is. Ska never died. Anyway, so we realized that we have a lot of shared interests, even in light of the fact that we all do very different things. We're all interested in cultivating the same kinds of ideas and seeing how they resonate with one another. A word about the technology. We're using basically 3 different sensors hypothetically four, if you count the electric guitar, but we're using 4 different kinds of sensors. One hammer-based sensor. We're using a microphone here. We are using a contact pickup that is presently attached to Natalia. And the last is, I guess you could say, an inductive sensor in the sense that the electric guitar has an electromagnet installed upon it. And through those sensors, we are manipulating those electronically, using them both as control signals as well as for their sonic properties. And the computer technology is aiding in that processing. And that's basically, that was my end of it.
Yeah, the live music that Ken and I will perform is all improvised. Ken started with a sample of concert music from English Baroque. And so we kind of improvise on that. In the middle of it, we're going to leave the English Baroque, we're going to go to French Baroque. And the reason why is because the French were known for this rhythmic figure, the dotted rhythmic figure, which is ta-ta, 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 ta-ta. But actually here, part of the technology that we have, because Natalia is hooked into a microphone that's taking a heartbeat, that rhythmic motif was the reason why we would go into the French Baroque, is because that actually induces the same meaning, but as the heartbeat.
And I think what we're most interested in figuring out is kind of the different ways in which the 3 of us artists can communicate. So we found in our process throughout this week that our methodologies for composition are extremely different from one another, both in terms of creating gestural vocabulary as well as kind of like sonic bits, which I found out was different than musical bits, and kind of figuring out how we can articulate our ideas and actually communicate and connect with one another. So our piece today has 5 sections: signal, body, connection, resonance, and then interface. And so for those who are watching online, the first bits are in the dark, so if the video suddenly comes black, that's supposed to happen. Okay?
All right. Yeah, absolutely. Let's see. How can we do this?
press play.
Sorry. I'll start. Check it. Where? Okay. Next. So yeah, so that was the piece. So we thought that, of course, like comments, questions, any kind of feedback, any responses, any kind of anything. Is there a chat interface? So I can make that. Thank you guys for tuning in. We really appreciate it.
So there was actually a moment that I really appreciated because I found myself completely focused on Natalia visually, and then there was a point in time in which I realized, oh, they're all doing something very visual. And it was like right at that moment where you guys were all transitioning, where you walked around and I don't know, at that point it really just kind of clicked for me. And then everything after that just made so much sense. Not that things before that didn't, but I really appreciated that moment and how that led up to the rest of it.
Yeah, and I really appreciate the transition to the lead motion, you coming over there and everything. But I almost feel like you could amplify that more, because it's like, oh, somebody's over there on a computer. and it's like, oh wait, somebody's moving something with their hands. So I think you could like that. Like I love that fact. I think you can accentuate that more because like you see people behind booths all the time doing this and doing this and doing this, but not actually doing anything. But you're actually doing something and sitting there with this.
Right.
So I'm not saying you need to be like throwing your hands up in the air.
Right,
but,
exactly.
Like,
No, I know.
Actually accentuate
Just don't care.
Yeah.
And I actually kind of like that juxtaposition.
I mean, like, and what I was trying to do was kind of like,
Oh, we had some like.
I was like, I was trying, but it's nice to know that I can do more.
But I kind of like that juxtaposition between like, because I think for us that was one of the things that we kind of realized, right, was that the manipulation, you never really know where it's coming from. And so I like the fact that there is this ambiguity after I leave the connect that then transfers, and that there is this gestural kind of mirroring that happens.
Right. Line of sight was something that was really crucial to us. And in that moment in particular, the fact that he's in her way for me sitting down. And in a way, like we specifically tried to position ourselves so that I would have a hard time seeing her. So that way it would force me to really kind of look at her gestural vocabulary and even, and have to kind of put myself in that kind of situation. This kind of interactivity was as much about putting ourselves in the position to enable the kinds of communication we wanted, as much as trying to wrap the technology around a particular circumstance. So a lot of it was setting it up for success or failure, depending on what we were trying to create, given the situation, communicatively.
Sure, what you're looking for in terms of response, but I'll just give you a couple things. And it's really terrific to figure out how to get going, and what are you after, and how do you ask each other those questions, and what do you want it to be, and what's it about, what's it for. I feel like this was a piece that started to be about, this is something that started to be really concerned with abjection. And abjection is a really hard topic. This idea that the body is enervated, there's nothing there anymore, and that everything's about absence and dystopia, and it's getting lower and lower and lower. It's a really hard place to start, and I felt like that was what the piece was trying to figure out how to express. That's just how I felt about it. Sure. No matter whether that's what you're doing or not. That's kind of the thing I was thinking about. And I feel like the challenge of starting in a place where there's diffusion or something that's invisible or hard to see is that then when we get to see something, we want it to be, dynamic, exciting, lively. So the question becomes like, how do you get out of abjection and dystopia into a place where something else can happen? And one thing is to do a half an hour, so I didn't have, we can't stay in abjection for half an hour. So eventually, everyone in the room is going to somehow be lively. But that's something you might want to think about, or we could all think about together in terms of like, what else is there? If you start from a place where things are inscrutable, what's the challenge being asked of your audience, or what are you hoping your audience will do in response to that? And that's a big one. And then the second thing is just this idea of mediated sound and liveliness. So abjection to the lively body or liveliness of energy, but then mediated sound or acoustic sound or cello in the room next to mediated sound. And there's there's a really funny tipping point. What's interesting about what you're up to is that everyone is kind of an equal. There's a democracy of energy and presence and space, and we get to meet everyone at about the same place. And that's unusual. Dancers usually take up all the space, and musicians usually receive the background, because the lively body is something that's visual, and the musical body is not always lively. It's not always, you don't have to seem lively to be playing something in a lively way. And sometimes we think that's fake when people do that, play in a really, like Midori-esque or something, like, well, you don't have to do that to make that sound. But the lively body is interesting to watch. But that wasn't what was happening, and it's kind of arranged in a way to not let that happen. So people see an equivalent. That also happened though I felt between the acoustic sound and the electric sound, the mediated sound. The challenge there is that we are encouraged to not believe in the liveliness of the liveness of the sound. We're encouraged to think that the signal is more important than the live sound, the sound that's produced in presence without amplification. And again, that's a tipping point. And when that tips, there's the possibility to stop caring that there's anything live and it can all be recorded. And I feel like in what you shared just now, we tipped way in that way, and it all could have been recorded. And it's nice to do this, to have the lively body making gesture, but I wasn't sure that anything needed to be live because of the way that balance was being kind of manipulated in the interfaces. So that's a big old question, if that makes sense. It's like, where's the balance between live and electronic, electroacoustical, or, like, what's the balance there? And then how is that balance encouraging us to care in a special way about what's lively or live? Because if we don't care about that, it could be a tape. And then why is everyone here? Then there are other questions that kind of cascade from that and snowball from it. Because then it could go back to, we have really interesting lively body. So let's focus on the lively body and see what she wants to tell us through her lively body. If we can't quite understand how the liveness of the music is contributing to the ensemble. And was that Philip Glass, or just Philip Glass what he pulled from? Is that like Bach-ish stuff?
It was actual English consort music from the 16th century.
In terms of what she was activating.
No, what you're playing at the end.
It was improv.
That was improvised.
But it sounded like Philip Glass. Like, oh, I didn't realize that Philip Glass stuff sounded so much like those, like a reworking of those Bach cello suites.
Yeah, and it's based. Who's the composer that like the sort of harmonic vocabulary is based on?
Well, the harmonic vocabulary was mine.
Right.
I was looking at this guy Abel because he was a gambist, and I could find all of his chords and try to arrange them in a way.
Of what century? When?
He was Middle Baroque.
Okay.
So, yeah, it's interesting that you should think of Philip Glass. I think that's more of a testament to Philip Glass than my improvisation skills.
And well, but it is interesting. I mean, there is this relationship between minimalist music and early period, early music, sort of Baroque and prior. Steve Reich himself has written on minimalistic structures inside of Periton and Raymond.
Well, John Cage String Quartet is based off of Cantus Firmus, and
Sure,
to play it.
Sure, but I mean, it's interesting that you mentioned that. It's almost like I hadn't even thought of that, and when you brought it up, it's like, oh, that's right there. Like, I completely missed that reference. I wasn't even thinking about minimal music, but it makes perfect sense. Like perfect sense. Like, yes, like I completely see where you're coming from, and that's interesting, and that's one of the things that we try to, the balance of the old with the new, right? Like the period instrument with the modern cello, the period instruments and my guitar are tuned to 415. The modern cello is tuned to 440. So there's that weird moment where we're crossfading between the modern cello and the manipulated live cello, where we have to kind of shift, like, because they're out of tune with one another, we have to actually harmonically modulate in that.
Well, I have to go, and I'm sorry. It's always terrible. It's like, okay, here's what I think. Bye. But I hope it's helpful. We can talk some more tomorrow.
Yeah, I was going to say, I do have questions about the inscrutability and an objection, because I wonder if you were referring to the inscrutability just because it was in the dark, or if it was the inscrutability of like the gestural.
Well, yeah, the gestural becomes inscrutable because it's in the dark. I mean, we know you're dancing, so we can see little bits of it, but we can't really see it. So at some point we give up. We did give up. It's like, okay, well, I can't see this, so I'll wait until I can see something.
Sure.
After the first moment of, and then, oh, okay. And then when the lights came, it was about Ken in an abject, like, deflated here.
Yeah.
And
Very Baroque style.
Yeah, exactly. But I'm like, well, the maybe a thing that would be really interesting to see in that moment is the body responding. And these are all just choices that come and should keep building, but the first part of it really kept staying in that space of being legible as abjection. Like, worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. And then at some point we all turn it around because, again, we can't stay in abjection. It's like, just humanly we can't do that.
Yeah. It's interesting, though, because I think that I was interested in kind of the juxtaposition of visual and audio at that point. And so the uncomfortability of, like, not being able to, see. And as you're saying that.
Yeah. It's hard. It's just not sustainable. We saw a play here. Who were they? That Hoi Polloi was here doing a show, and they did the last 20 minutes in darkness. A lot of plays written in darkness. And it's just, part of it's being 2014 because we're really wired to kind of want things quicker. But there's also just something about, what is the demand you made on an audience or your collaborators even about like what's presence and how long can you stay in a place where things are imperceptible. And then if it's really about building the muscles to perceive something that's difficult, how long does it take to do that? And probably longer to get us to the place to actually be in relationship to movement in the dark. Probably longer to get there rather than shorter. So then it's just kind of a question of how to work through all that stuff. It's really, but they're like Metterling. So symbolist love the idea that you do plays in the dark, and this was a version of Plato's Republic. The last 20 minutes were in the dark. After a while, it's like, okay, well, and it was actually it was a recording we had to hear. We listened to a recording in the dark. And so that was it's a lot to ask. These are always great questions to ask.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
That thing I can't stand. I'm sorry.
I'll see you tomorrow, right? Everybody's gonna come back tomorrow?
We actually have to get back.
Aww,
you're gonna head out? Oh,
Do you like
really? Okay, of course. Oh my
I
gosh.
appreciate you. As part of
And of
this.
course, you're a beautiful dancer.
Thank you so much. Hope to see you again.
Oh my gosh, you gotta come back. You guys will, of course. I'm sorry to miss you, though. Goodbye now, then. Okay.
Thank you so much.
Safe travels.
I was sure
Bye,
to
Peter.
I was sure to give them the
Oh, yeah,
the essentials.
Thank you.